Welcome, my fellow whisperers, to Whispers in the Dark. If you like your horror slow, tense, and creeping under your skin, the kind that makes you check the lock twice, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. And now, settle in, because tonight's story is about a woman who thought the last train home was the safest place to be. She was wrong. It started with the station, not the bright, daytime version with families and commuters, and the smell of pastries from the kiosk. This station was its nighttime self, hollowed out, echoing, stripped down to concrete bones and fluorescent veins. The overhead lights hummed like tired insects. A vending machine flickered between on and dead, as if it couldn't decide whether to exist. My breath came out in pale, nervous fog, and the air tasted like metal and rain. It had been a long shift, the kind where time feels like wet wool dragged across your skin. My phone was at 6%. My charger was, of course, at home. The bus had stopped running an hour earlier, and I had two choices: call someone to get me at nearly midnight on a weeknight, or take the last train out and walk from the next town over. I chose the train. I told myself I'd be fine. I told myself it was a short journey. I told myself I was being dramatic for feeling uneasy standing alone on a platform that seemed designed to swallow people whole. A sign above the tracks blinked 23:58, northbound, and then stuttered, the letters briefly scrambling into something that looked like no before returning to normal. I stared at it a moment too long, and the skin at the back of my neck tightened. The wind slid along the platform, dragging old newspaper scraps and a crisp packet across the ground with a dry, rattling sound. Somewhere farther down, an ad poster peeled at the corners. A woman in the poster smiled widely, and a tear in the paper made it look like her mouth split a little too far. I adjusted my bag strap and stepped closer to the yellow line, peering down the tunnel. Nothing, only darkness, only the far-off, slow drip of water that echoed like a patient clock. Then the rails began to sing. A vibration first, like the station itself had swallowed something large and was clearing its throat. The sound rose metal on metal, a distant animal wail, until the train finally appeared, two headlights pushing through the tunnel like pale eyes. It arrived with a sigh and a long metallic shudder, brakes squealing, doors unlocking with that familiar, indifferent clack. I waited for other passengers. A couple people did emerge barely. A man with headphones and a hood up, moving quickly. Two teenagers laughing too loudly, daring the emptiness to react. A woman in a long coat, face hidden behind her scarf, who disappeared into the stairwell without looking back. That was it. That was everyone. The doors opened to a carriage that looked like it had been abandoned on purpose. The interior lights were on, but dim. The seats were empty, except for old stains you didn't want to interpret. A discarded takeaway cup rolled lazily under one seat each time the train shifted its weight. I stepped inside anyway. The doors closed behind me with a finality that made my stomach clench, and the train began to move, gathering speed as the station fell away. I chose a seat on the right side, halfway down the carriage, close enough to the door that I could get out quickly if I needed to, but far enough that I didn't feel like I was sitting under a spotlight. The carriage smelled like damp fabric and cheap disinfectant. Above the windows, advertisements stared down. Smiling faces, bright colors, promises that felt insulting at this hour. A safety notice near the door read, "If you see something suspicious, tell staff immediately." Tell staff. I looked up and down the carriage. There was no staff, no conductor, no one. Just me and the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the tracks, like a heartbeat trying to keep calm. I checked my phone again. 5%. No signal. Or maybe it was just struggling, the way everything did out here. I typed a quick message to my friend Hannah anyway on last train home. Phone dying. Talk tomorrow, and hit send. It hung there unsent, like a thought I couldn't swallow. I sighed, shoved the phone in my pocket, and tried to relax my shoulders. Outside, the world was reduced to passing darkness, occasional smearlights of distant roads, and the reflection of my own face in the window. Pale, tired, eyes too wide. For a few minutes, it was just a train, just an ordinary late-night ride, just the familiar hum of motion. I even started to believe my own reassurance. Then at the next stop, the doors opened, and someone stepped in. He wasn't loud. He didn't announce himself with heavy boots, or a cough, or a phone conversation on speaker like some people did. He moved like he'd already been here a while, like he belonged to the shadows between the seats. He wore a dark jacket too big for him, or maybe padded to hide something. A beanie pulled low. His face, I only caught pieces at first. A straight nose, a mouth set in a line that wasn't angry exactly, just decided. And his eyes, not wild, not bloodshot, not the eyes of a cartoon villain. Normal eyes, almost brown, calm. But they swept the carriage once, slow and thorough. And when they landed on me, it felt like someone had pressed a cold coin to my spine. He looked away after half a second, as if I was nothing worth noticing. Then he sat down, not across from me, not in the far corner, 2 seats behind me, close enough that if I leaned back, I could see him in the window reflection. Close enough that I could hear the small sounds he made, fabric shifting, a faint tap of fingernails against plastic, the quiet inhale through his nose, like he was smelling the air. I told myself it was nothing. People sit where they sit. Maybe he wanted to be near the doors. Maybe he didn't want to sit alone in the far end. Maybe my instincts were just overreacting because I was tired and alone, and the station had freaked me out. Still, I pulled my bag a little closer. I straightened, pretending to look out the window. In the glass, his reflection sat with his head slightly bowed, shoulders forward. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't watching anything. He was just sitting, waiting. The train moved on. Minutes passed like slow drops of water. At the next stop, the doors opened again. No one got in. No one got out. The man didn't move. The doors closed. And for the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. The little red emergency intercom panel near the door was scratched, like someone had dragged keys over it. And one of the screws was missing, leaving a tiny, dark hole. I stared at it until my eyes started to burn. It was stupid, but I suddenly had the irrational thought that the intercom wouldn't work if I needed it. That it had been made useless. A chill crawled up my arms. I shifted in my seat, making the smallest movement possible. Behind me, the man's fingernails tapped once, tap, tap on the seat arm, like he'd heard the change in my breathing. I swallowed. The train plunged into a stretch of countryside where the darkness outside thickened into a solid thing. No streetlights, no houses, just black fields and the faint, occasional outline of leafless trees. The reflection in the window grew stronger as the outside light vanished, and now I could see more clearly. My face, my eyes, and behind me, his. He wasn't looking at the window. He was looking at me. Not openly, his head stayed forward, chin lowered, but his eyes were angled up, fixed on my reflection. When I turned my head slightly, pretending to adjust my hair, he didn't flinch, didn't look away. He simply blinked, slow, like a cat. My mouth went dry. I forced myself to stare ahead, to breathe evenly. Maybe he was just staring into space. Maybe he was tired. Maybe a memory surfaced, uninvited. Earlier that week, at work, someone had left the news on in the break room. The screen had shown a blurry image of a man in a dark jacket, captured on a station camera. There had been a headline along the bottom: "Police seek information in connection with attacks near rail line." Attacks, plural. They'd called him something in the papers. Something that sounded like it belonged in a story, not in real life. The night line killer. I'd laughed, uneasy, and someone had said, "Yeah, he targets women traveling alone. Always late, always trains. They still don't have him." I'd rolled my eyes and said, "That's why I don't take the last train." And then tonight happened, and here I was, and my skin was prickling like it wanted to crawl off my bones. I reached into my pocket for my phone, trying to do it casually. 4%. Still no signal. My thumb hovered over the emergency call, shortcut anyway, as if dialing numbers without service would somehow summon help through sheer will. Behind me, I heard the soft sound of fabric. He shifted. I froze. Then he spoke. "Long night." His voice was mild, polite, the kind of voice that could ask for directions, the kind of voice that could thank a cashier. Normal. That almost made it worse. I forced a small laugh. Yeah, work ran late. I hated how thin my voice sounded. Where you headed? He asked. There it was. The question you could answer innocently if you weren't afraid. I could lie. I should lie. But lying sometimes makes you sound like you're lying, and I couldn't afford to give him anything to latch onto. Just home, I said, and I kept my eyes on the window. Same, he said. Then you don't see many people out this time. No, I agreed. His fingernails tapped again. Tap, tap. I waited for him to say something else. Instead, he chuckled quietly, like he'd thought of a private joke, and fell silent. The train rattled on. I tried to think rationally. I tried to collect my options like items in a bag. Option 1, move carriages. But if I stood up and walked away, it would confirm I was afraid. It might provoke him. And the next carriage could be empty too. Worse. I'd be trapped with him without even the illusion of distance. Option 2, get off at the next stop and wait for another train. There would not be another train. This was the last one. Option 3, call someone. My phone was dying and had no service. Option 4, use the emergency intercom. If it worked. If it didn't, I'd be announcing that I was helpless. Option 5, do nothing and hope I'm wrong. Hope he's harmless. Hope my fear is just fear. A laugh bubbled in my throat at how pathetic that hope was. The next stop was announced in a crackling voice that sounded like it hadn't been human in years. The speaker distorted the words so badly they became a growl. The overhead lights flickered, briefly dimming, until the carriage was lit by the pale glow of the advertising panels and the ghost light of the outside. The man behind me leaned forward slightly. When the lights came back, his reflection in the window looked closer. I hadn't heard him move. I felt my heart begin to race, fast and clumsy. The train slowed. It pulled into a small station, one of those tiny platforms in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by hedges and silent fields. The lights on the platform were spaced far apart, leaving pockets of darkness between them like open mouths. The doors opened with a hiss. Cold air poured in. No one got in. No one got out. For a moment, I considered stepping onto the platform anyway, just to create distance, just to get away from him. But the platform looked too empty, too open, like a place where someone could scream and the sound would fall into the fields and never come back. The doors beeped. They began to close, and as they did, the man behind me stood up. My pulse jumped so hard, I felt it in my throat. He didn't go to the door. He walked forward, past my row, and sat in the seat directly across the aisle from me. Now we were facing each other. He leaned back, legs slightly apart, hands resting casually on his knees. Close enough that I could see the faint stubble on his jaw, the small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his lips looked dry. He smiled. It wasn't a full smile, not friendly, just the smallest curve at one corner, like he'd found something pleasing. "Better view up here," he said. My fingers curled around my bag strap, so tightly it hurt. "Sure," I managed. His gaze flicked to my hands, then to my throat, then back to my eyes. "You nervous?" he asked, still mild. "No," I lied. His smile grew a fraction. "You should be." The words landed between us with a soft thud. I stared at him. He held my gaze without blinking. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. My body reacted before my mind did. I stood up abruptly, the motion sharp enough to make my seat squeak. I half stumbled into the aisle. He paused, hand still in his pocket, and tilted his head. I could hear my breathing, loud in my ears. "I need the toilet," I said, and the lie sounded ridiculous in the empty carriage. He withdrew his hand slowly. It was empty. "Of course," he said, like a gentleman. I moved past him, trying not to run, trying to keep my steps steady. I walked toward the end of the carriage where the toilet was, my eyes fixed forward, my skin buzzing like a live wire. Behind me, I heard him stand. Not rush, just stand and follow. My stomach dropped. The toilet door was at the end, a narrow little cubicle with a broken lock sticker. I reached it, grabbed the handle. Locked. My hand slipped on the cold metal. No, no, no. I turned slightly, and he was there in the aisle, 5 steps away, walking with unhurried calm. Like we were the only 2 people left in the world and time belonged to him. He stopped 2 steps from me. The train rocked gently, the motion like a lullaby for monsters. "Locked?" he asked. I swallowed. "Looks like it." He looked at the door, then at me. "Unlucky," he said softly. "I suppose you'll have to come back." My mind ran frantic circles. Run past him. He'd grab me, scream. Who would hear, hit him? With what, my bag? I took a step backward until my shoulder touched the cold wall. His gaze swept over me again, slow, almost appreciative, like he was choosing produce at a market. "You're alone," he said, as if statting the weather. I didn't answer. He leaned in slightly, just enough that I could smell him, something sharp under cheap aftershave. Iron, maybe. Or maybe my brain was inventing smells because it needed a reason to panic. He lowered his voice. "Do you know what they call me?" My stomach turned to ice. I forced my mouth to work. "No." He smiled again. "They give everyone names, makes the fear tidy." He reached into his pocket again, and this time he pulled something out. Not a knife, a key. It was small, worn, attached to a short bit of red plastic like it belonged to a locker or an old building. He held it up between us. "I have keys," he said, "for lots of doors." He turned slightly and tapped the toilet door with the key. Tap. Then he slid the key into the lock. The door clicked open. My breath caught. He didn't go inside. He opened it and stepped aside, gesturing with a small flourish. "After you," he said. The inside of the toilet cubicle was dark, and the light above it flickered weakly, as if reluctant to illuminate what might happen there. I stared into that cramped space and felt the trap in my bones. If I went in, he would follow. The door would close. There would be nowhere to run. If I didn't, he was right here, blocking the aisle, between me and the rest of the carriage. My mind grabbed at a desperate idea. I laughed a short, shaky sound that didn't match the terror in my stomach. "No thanks," I said, and I tried to sound annoyed, not afraid. "I don't need it that badly." His eyebrows rose, faintly amused. "Suit yourself." He shut the door again and pocketed the key. Then, to my shock, he stepped past me, brushing close enough that his sleeve grazed my arm. The touch felt like a smear of cold oil. He walked back down the carriage. I stood frozen, my body refusing to believe I'd been allowed to live another minute. Then he sat again, but not where he'd been. He chose the seat right near the connecting door between carriages, where the narrow passage was, where someone might try to slip away. He sat like a spider, settling in the middle of a web. I returned to my seat with stiff legs, my mind racing so fast it felt like it might tear itself apart. I had to do something. I couldn't wait for him to decide he was done playing polite. I glanced toward the door at the end, the one that led into the next carriage. It looked the same: dim lights, empty rows. I couldn't see anyone, but I had to try. I waited until the train entered another dark stretch, when the window reflections strengthened again. I watched him in the glass. His head was angled down, as if he were looking at his hands. I took a slow breath. Then I stood and began walking toward the connecting door. He looked up immediately, not surprised, as if he'd been waiting for this exact movement. I kept walking anyway, forcing my legs not to tremble. The connecting door was one of those stiff, heavy ones with a small button and a rubber seal. I reached for it. Behind me, he stood. The hairs on my arms lifted. I pressed the button. The door clicked, reluctant. I pulled it open and stepped into the narrow vestibule between carriages. It was colder there, the sound of the train louder, the metal floor vibrating under my shoes. I reached for the next door. It was locked. My heart slammed into my ribs. I tried again, harder. Locked. I spun, and he was in the vestibule with me, filling it with his presence. The cramped space made him feel larger, the walls closer. He smiled with something like satisfaction. "No," he said softly, as if correcting a child. "Not that way." I backed up until my shoulders hit the sealed door behind me. The rubber edges pressed cold against my skin. "What do you want?" I heard myself ask, and my voice was thin with panic. He tilted his head. "You already know." I shook my head, even though I did know. My mind didn't want to accept what my body was screaming. He lifted one hand, palm open. "Give me your phone," he said. My hand went to my pocket instinctively, guarding it. He sighed, almost patient. "It's dying anyway." How do you? He cut me off with a small laugh. I watch people. That's what I do. The train rattled, and the lights above us flickered. For a moment, his face was half lit, half shadowed, and his eyes looked darker than they should have. I don't want trouble, I said, and the lie felt useless. He stepped closer. The space between us vanished. His voice dropped to a whisper, intimate. Neither do I. His hand moved. Not fast, not frantic. Smooth, like he'd done this before. And in that instant, something inside me snapped. Not courage, not bravery, just pure animal refusal. The kind of refusal that comes from bone and blood. I shoved him hard. He stumbled back half a step, surprised. And that half step was everything. I turned, lunged for the door behind him, the one back into my carriage. I slammed the button and yanked it open, squeezing past his shoulder. His hand grabbed for my coat, fingers catching fabric. It tore. I ripped free and ran down the aisle. My boots thudded on the vibrating floor. My bag banged against my hip. I could hear him behind me, footsteps quickening now, the calm falling away. I sprinted for the emergency intercom panel near the door, my fingers shaking. I slapped the button. Nothing. I slapped it again, harder. Still nothing. The panel made a sad, dead click, like pressing a toy with no batteries. A laugh came from behind me, quiet, delighted. See, he said, breathless now. It's just us. I spun. He was halfway down the carriage, moving toward me. I backed away, searching wildly for anything to use. My eyes landed on the red emergency hammer case near the window. The little glass box. My hands flew to it. The plastic cover was cracked already, like someone had tried to open it before. I pried at it desperately, nails scraping. The cover popped. I grabbed the hammer. It was heavier than I expected, solid, real. I turned, holding it up with both hands like I'd seen people do in films, as if it could create a barrier. He stopped a few feet away and raised his eyebrows. Well, he murmured, that's new. Stay back, I said, and my voice came out louder than I thought it could. His eyes flicked to the hammer, then to my face. You'll use it, he asked, almost curious. I will, I said, and this time I believed myself. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. He took a step forward. I lifted the hammer higher, arms shaking. He took another step. I swung, not at his head, not at his body. I swung at the window beside me with everything I had. The hammer smashed into the glass with a sharp crack, spider webbing instantly. Cold air whistled in. He paused, startled. I swung again. The glass shattered further, fragments falling in glittering pieces onto the seat. Wind roared through the growing hole, tearing at my hair and coat. He lunged toward me, reaching out. I swung the hammer again, not at the window this time. At him. The hammer connected with his forearm with a sickening thud. He cursed, a sudden flash of real anger. I ran down the aisle toward the far end of the carriage where the driver's compartment would be, where there might be a door, where there might be anyone. He followed, faster now, no longer pretending this was polite. The train hurtled through the darkness. The lights flickered again, plunging the carriage into brief, strobing shadow. My heart hammered so hard my chest hurt. I reached the end door. It was locked. Of course, I rattled it anyway, yanking, slamming my shoulder into it. Locked. Behind me, his footsteps were close. I spun around, hammer raised. He slowed, but his expression had changed. The calm mask was gone. What was underneath was focused, hungry in a careful way. "You broke my arm," he said, voice low. "I'll break more," I whispered. His gaze dropped to the hammer. "You're making this complicated." Then he reached into his jacket. This time he pulled out a knife. Not a big, dramatic blade. Something smaller, practical. The kind you could hide easily. The kind you could use without drawing attention until it was too late. The metal caught the flickering light and looked almost black. My throat tightened. My hands gripped the hammer so hard my knuckles burned. He stepped forward. I didn't have room to run now. The locked door at my back was a dead end. The aisle was narrow. The windows offered only speeding darkness and wind. My eyes flicked to the shattered window behind me. The hole I'd started. It wasn't big enough to climb through, but it was big enough to do something else. He moved closer, knife low, like he didn't want to raise it until the last second, like he didn't want me to have warning. I backed up, pretending to be trapped. He smiled faintly again, sensing it, and when he got close enough, I swung the hammer hard into the edge of the shattered window frame. The remaining glass gave way, exploding outward into the night. Wind screamed in, a violent rush that tore at everything loose. Papers, dust, my hair, the ends of my coat. The sudden force startled him, and he flinched, eyes narrowing. I used that half-second to drive the hammer down onto his hand. The knife clattered to the floor. He snarled a real sound, animal and furious, and lunged at me with both hands. His fingers closed around my throat. The pressure was immediate and terrifying. The world narrowed. My ears filled with rushing blood. His face was inches from mine, eyes wide now, mouth twisted. I gagged, hammer slipping. My feet scrabbled on the vibrating floor, and then my hand found the knife on the ground. My fingers closed around the handle. Cold, real. I didn't think. I didn't aim for revenge. I aimed for survival. I drove it into his side. Once, he jerked violently, breath exploding out of him. His grip loosened just enough for air to hiss into my lungs like fire. I shoved him back. He staggered, eyes shocked now, not hurt, not pain, but surprise that I'd done it. Surprise that prey had teeth. I didn't wait. I ran down the aisle again, back toward the middle of the carriage, clutching the hammer in one hand and my dying phone in the other. My lungs burned. My vision tunneled. Behind me, he stumbled, then followed slower now, one hand pressed to his side, the other reaching for something in his pocket. "You," he rasped, "you should." The train began to slow. A station was coming. Lights appeared outside, distant and blurred. My mind latched onto them like a lifeline. I sprinted for the door, the nearest one. The train hissed, brakes squealing, and the doors unlocked with that blessed clack. They opened. Cold night air hit me like a wall. I leapt onto the platform as the train was still rolling the last few inches, nearly falling, boots skidding on wet concrete. The station was small, but not empty. There was a maintenance worker in a high-vis jacket at the far end, cigarette glowing, and a couple of people waiting under the shelter, half asleep. I screamed. It ripped out of me, raw and ragged, not words at first, just sound. A sound made for warning a whole world. Heads snapped up. The worker dropped his cigarette. The couple stood, confused. I turned back to the open train doors. The man was there, standing in the doorway, one hand pressed to his side, blood dark against his jacket. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with a quiet promise. He didn't step off. Not yet. He just stared. Then he lifted his hand, the one not holding his wound, and gave me the smallest wave. A farewell, a promise, and as people started running toward me, as someone shouted, "What's wrong?" As the maintenance worker fumbled for his radio, the man stepped back into the carriage. The doors beeped. They began to close. I lunged forward, grabbing at the edge, screaming, "Stop him." He's. The doors shut. The train pulled away. And through the window, through the flickering interior light, I saw him watching me as he disappeared into the dark, like he'd never been real at all, like he was only a story you told yourself to stay afraid. But the bruise blossoming on my throat was real. The tear in my coat was real. The blood on my hands, his blood was real. And the fact that he'd gotten away, that was the realest thing of all. The police came, of course. They asked questions under harsh station lights. They wrapped a foil blanket around my shoulders that crinkled with every breath. Someone pressed a paper cup of water into my shaking hands. "Did you get a good look at him?" an officer asked. I tried to describe him. The beanie, the scar near his eyebrow, the calm eyes. They exchanged glances when I mentioned the key. I saw the way their faces tightened. I knew then that this wasn't the first time. Later, after statements and waiting, and the slow, dawning horror of what I'd survived, I sat in the back of a police car while the station emptied again. The lights buzzed overhead. The tracks sang faintly in the distance as another train passed somewhere far away. My phone finally died completely, screen black, like a closed eye. An officer leaned in. "We'll get you home safely." I nodded, numb, but as they drove me through the sleeping countryside, past fields and hedges, and stretches of road with no houses, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. He had keys for lots of doors, and he'd waved at me like he knew we'd meet again. When I finally got home, the house was silent. Too silent. I stood in my hallway with the lights on, staring at my own front door as if it might open without being touched. I checked every lock, twice, 3 times. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wrapped in the foil blanket, and listened. The night outside my window was thick and heavy. A car passed somewhere, tires hissing on wet asphalt. A dog barked once, far away, then stopped. And then, so faint, I almost convinced myself it wasn't real, came a sound from downstairs. A soft tap, like a fingernail against plastic. Tap, tap. I held my breath. The sound came again. Tap, tap. From the front door, from the letterbox. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My entire body became a listening thing. A thin slip of paper slid through the letterbox and fluttered onto the floor. I stayed frozen for a long time, staring at the hallway, waiting for the handle to turn. It didn't. Eventually, when my legs felt like they might give out from tension alone, I crept out of my room, every step silent, every muscle ready to run. The paper lay on the tiles like a dead leaf. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a train ticket, the kind you get printed from the machine at a station. On the back, written in neat, steady handwriting, were 3 words: "See you soon." And beneath that, a time, 23:58, the exact time the last train left the station. My throat tightened. I looked at the front door. The locks held. The chain was on. The house was quiet. But in my mind, I saw him standing in the train doorway, waving, calm, as a man catching the next stop. And I understood something that made my stomach turn, colder than fear. The night line doesn't end when you get off the train. Some journeys follow you home, and sometimes the person who sits too close, who watches your reflection, who smiles like he's already decided. Sometimes he doesn't need to chase you. Sometimes he just waits, because he has keys for lots of doors. And now he knew where mine was. And that's where tonight's story ends. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. If you enjoyed the chills, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next nightmare. And leave a comment. Have you ever been alone on a train late at night? Did anything ever feel off? Until next time, sleep tight, and if you hear the rails singing, don't look in the window, because you might see someone looking back.